morning. I'm very pleased to be here. I would like to start with thanking President Kim and his very competent staff, Eric, Mason, Nayung, for inviting me here and helping me through the conference. I am originally from the Netherlands. I was born in Rotterdam, next to a football stadium where Wang Ilbong now plays, and he's a very lucky man because that is a great town to be in, and I miss it. It's also a town with lots of immigrants and lots of children, and it's a very dynamic place. And I've been coming to Korea for the last 30 years, and I've also always found it a very dynamic place. Korea has changed so much, and in many ways for the better. And the issue you have with the fertility rate and the downward fertility trend is a huge challenge, which, as Dr. Yamasaki said, cannot just be addressed by the government. It requires efforts from all across society. Dr. Yamasaki's intervention was very good, and it's very hard act to follow. But I'm very grateful for him to, and we didn't discuss this in advance, to raise issues around regular employment and non-regular employment, issues that not all OECD countries have, so we don't have necessarily very good statistics across countries on the issue. What I will do here is present you the trends in Korea as they compare to OECD countries. So you can see how Korea fares, how it is positioned, and what you do well and what you do not so well. And then, in the end, I would like to end with some policy conclusions and recommendations, which aren't all that far off from the things Dr. Yamasaki was referring to. So there must be at least an element of truth in it. Right, let's start with a picture that shows you the trend across OECD countries. The black dot is the fertility rate in 1970, the white diamond in 1995, and the blue bar shows the TFR as it was in 2022. Throughout, you will see on charts the Korean flag above the outcome for Korea. And if I have an OECD average to present, that often is presented in red. So here you can see that Korea has the lowest total fertility rate of the OECD, and it has dropped enormously since 1970. On the right-hand side of the chart, you see a couple of countries which are not part of the OECD. These include Asian countries, including Mongolia and Kazakhstan, where the fertility rate in recent years actually has gone up. So, and that's also the main point of the second chart. The dark blue line is the fertility rate average across the OECD countries. And what you can see from in the early 2000s until the great financial crisis roughly, you could see an increase in the total fertility rate. So there is no reason to assume that the fertility rate will always go down or that the trend is inevitable. The other two lines in this chart show you the age of first birth. That's the lower line, and the mean age of birth of women when they give childbirth. And that is highest now in Korea at over 33 years of age. So you can see how that has increased. So the trend is to later and fewer births. Now, this chart is actually quite interesting. I'll take some time to explain it. What you see here is fertility rates by age group. And it has 7 blocks. So on the left, you see the fertility rate for the age group 15 to 19, and then 20 to 24, and then 25 to 30. So the middle group of bars is 30 to 35, and the bars further to the right are the older age groups, 5 years. What you see, the blue bar, is the fertility rate for that age group in 2000. 2010 is orange, or pink, and 2020 is gray. And what you see here for Australia, but Australia could also have been France or Norway, the patterns are very similar, is that there is a decline in fertility rates among the younger people, among the 3 younger age groupings. And you see that in Japan too. You see it not just in Korea, it actually declines enormously. Fertility rate among people below 30 in Korea has just dropped spectacularly. And this, and also in the other countries, but there the effect is not as strong, shows that younger people want to establish themselves first in the labor market, in the housing market, and in the marriage market, or the partnering market, before they have children. And they postpone having children to later ages. And you can see for Australia and Japan that there is some catch-up among the older age groups. Whereas in Korea, that effect is much smaller. So not only is there an issue with establishing for young people in the labor market, even when they do, at the later ages, they do not necessarily have children in the way they used to, in the number they used to in the past. Indeed, one of the effects that we've seen over the years is the growing incidence of childlessness. These are, the blue dot shows the level of childlessness, the incidence of childlessness among those born in 1975. So they're 50 years of age now, almost. The white triangle shows the same thing, but then for the cohort of women born in 1955, so 20 years prior to that. And you can see on the very left that there are a couple of countries who have seen a spectacular increase in the incidence of childlessness. And those include Spain, Italy, and on the very left, Japan, where the level of the incidence of childlessness among women born in 75 is over 25%. You see, Korea here is still doing fairly okay, but the data I have seen from the COSIS website suggests that this will also increase rapidly. Finally, in terms of outcomes, marriage rates in Korea have gone down very significantly. You can see that in 1980, they were well above the OECD average. Now the marriage rate is well below the OECD average. So is it in New Zealand and Australia, the countries on the left, but they have a lot, there are a lot of children who are born outside of marriage. And then it concerns 40 to 50% of the children who are born. You don't have anything quite like that in Korea or in Japan. Finally, the implications of this, together with increased life expectancy, is that Korea will age incredibly quickly. At the moment, the blue bar, at the moment it was 2020, showed that for each pensioner, someone over 65 years of age, there were 5 people of working age. In 2060, you can see that that ratio will almost be 1:1. The implications of this are enormous. The demand for support, for health, long-term care, pensions will explode and will put serious pressure on the fiscal position. Now, what causes fertility rates to decline? We have done some work in recent years across the OECD panel data study, pooling data for member states and trying to find factors that influence the trend of the fertility rate. Now, one of the things which has been important across the world in reducing fertility rates has been effective access to contraceptive measures. That has affected fertility rates across the world. Now, for OECD countries, we have looked at the impact of employment rates and employment participation of men and women. And these have a positive impact on the fertility rate. Now, that wasn't always the case. In the past, female employment had a very negative impact on fertility rates. But with the development of work-life balance supports in many OECD countries, supports as maternity leave, parental leave, early childhood education and care, you have seen that women, mothers, are more likely to remain in the labor force and combine work and family commitments. That story may not hold yet for Korea. It might hold for higher income workers, women with access to a regular employment contract who manage to stay in the labor force rather than withdraw. But unfortunately, that happens still too often. So the work-life balance supports have a positive effect on the fertility rate. What is negative is poor labor market conditions and housing cost. We'll come back to that. But despite all the fancy econometrics, the explanatory power of the regressions weren't all that high. There is a lot of the trend that we cannot explain. And that points to the relevance of changes in attitudes, things like the impact of gender norms that we have difficulty measuring and modeling in a regression analysis like that. So all these factors are also potentially very important for explaining fertility rate trends. As I said, Dr. Yamasaki has already discussed the impact of regular and non-regular employment, so I don't want to go into detail in this. But what is very clear is that young Korean women have a very high level of educational attainment. So do young Korean men, but that of women is even higher, and it's well above the OECD average. Now, this chart, the Korean flag has dropped off somehow, but Korea is the one on the very right. It has the highest score. So you would expect that women would also be very well presented in the labor market. Well, that's not quite the case. And you can see, while the education gap for young women is in favor of young women, the employment gap for women in prime age workers, 25-54, is substantial in advantage of men, and the gap is wider than the OECD average. And towards the right-hand side of the chart, employment among mothers with a child in the 0 to 14 age group is among the lowest in the OECD. So the message here is quite clear. It is very difficult for Korean mothers to combine their work with family commitments. So you have to make a choice. You either stay in your career, you pursue your career, and do not have children, or you often drop out of the labor force and do have 1 or 2 children. But it would be so much better if it were possible to combine the two. As already said, because of women's overrepresentation in non-regular, lowly paid employment, the gender pay gap in Korea is huge. And that also makes it less attractive for women to stay in the labor force. Now here's a chart which comes to the direct costs of children and their negative impact on fertility trends. And this one is the cost of private education, which keeps rising. Now, and you can see here, this is a household budget comparison of what Korean families spend on food and transport or education, and that's on the left-hand side in the dark blue field, compared to the OECD average, and it is 3 times as high. Compared to other countries, the cost of education has a negative bearing on fertility rates in Korea. The issue is, of course, why is that? And it comes to a very key point of a factor which I think affects the fertility trend rather negatively in Korea, is the competitive nature of the education system and the employment system. As from a very young age, kids in this country have to go to after school, the Hagwon. Not only cost that money, but it also might affect the well-being of the children, because they just have to learn. They are supervised parents who spend a lot of time and money on their children and are very directive. I have 3 boys, and they all went to, my wife's Irish. We live in France. We wanted the kids to speak English. They speak Dutch as well, just good enough to communicate with my mother. But the main point was they went to a school which taught French and English. And there were kids there from all over the world. And I remember standing, watching one of my sons play tennis with a boy from Korea. And, you know, things go wrong, and that happens. But when the Korean boy made a mistake, his father immediately moved in and explained to him, probably in Korean, why or whatever the mistake was. But I was just going like, why are you doing this? Why don't you just let the kids play? But this competition is there from a very early age. There is this micromanagement which goes very far, whereas I can't, my children will disagree with me, they won't say that I'm a very liberal father, but it was nowhere near the intervention by the Korean father. Now, parents across the world want the best for their kids. There is no doubt about it, but there's different ways of doing it. And there's different ways of setting up a school system. The Korean school system is very much geared towards college academic exam, which helps you to qualify for universities. But it's learning, it's knowing things. It's not necessarily being creative. And I think that you should look at the nature of your education system. Another example from where I'm from, the northern part of Belgium, they speak Flemish, which is close to Dutch. And there is a TV program they used to do every year, and there's a dictate. And they would read out a sentence or a couple of sentences, and the kids from the Netherlands and from Flanders were asked, how to write it correctly, or they had to deal with questions on their knowledge. The Flemish kids beat the Dutch kids, hands down. The Belgian education system is very much like the French system. It's learning, 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 and learning. Getting knowledge into your brain. The entrance exam into as a staffer of the European Commission is like that. The Dutch school system is completely different. It's playing, it's being creative. It is teachers trying to coach their children, or not their children, the children in their class, to address issues. That's, I think, a different way of teaching. And I think it would help to get the competition out of your system if you just reduced the weight of the central entrance exam, which would reduce the stress for the kids, but also reduce the cost of private education. The other one here, Korea, is on the left. What does it show? The chart shows the number of 20 to 29-year-olds who live at home. 80% in Korea, 80% in Italy. If you're living at home, that's not very conducive to having children and establishing a family. The cost of housing, the increasing cost of housing, has a very negative impact on the fertility rate. And it also contributes to younger people staying at home, apart from the difficulties there are in the labor market and getting into a career pattern which helps you to afford, be able to afford raising children. But this is a big issue. And it's for that reason that governments should think about supporting young people on the housing market. And housing markets vary across the world. Korea has its Yonsei system, which is different from anywhere else. But there are ways and means by which the government can support young people to get in the housing market and become independent. As I said, the econometrics cannot explain anything. There are other factors at play. Surveys suggest that Koreans are more worried about losing their job, more worried about financial insecurity than in many other countries. And those worries do not help with considering setting up a partnership, getting married, and having children. The other thing, of course, is that with the private education, the other side of the coin is that the parents set enormously high norms to parenting to themselves. So young people saying, oh, we can't do that. I couldn't possibly take on that responsibility to be micromanaging my child for that long period of time. The other thing is, among the younger generation, there are more who value other life goals, who think that, rightly or wrongly, that they don't need children for their happiness throughout life. And that, of course, doesn't help with regard to the fertility rate. And as already said, if you can't establish yourself in a labor market career, or if you have to choose between your labor market career and establishing a family, there will be women who will choose to have a family, but there will also be women who will choose to remain in their labor market career. As Dr. Yamasaki has already said, it's very important these days that men contribute to unpaid care work, and gender equality is very important, and we've got a lot to learn. I was thinking about this when we did this picture with our cards holding up, standing here. 7 men, not 1 woman. That's a bit odd. At the OECD, we're no longer allowed to have panels in which there are no women. The panels are out. And you would have thought that there are enough capable women to be in a senior position. And the same kind of gender equality notion at home is also very important. There are concerns in the US, but also in Korea, that younger women vote in a completely different way than younger men do. It would be good to reduce that gap, younger people on the same wavelength again, and be accepting of younger women pursuing their labor market aspirations. Right. This chart shows you some of the objectives family policy might have. Across the OECD, family policy is geared towards fighting child poverty, family poverty. It is geared towards trying to help men and women, fathers and mothers, to stay in the labor force. It is geared towards promoting gender equality and child development. And in some countries, it is geared towards enabling people to have the children they would like at the time of their choosing. Now, this, as we've heard this morning, is very much a key driver of Korean policy development, as it is of Japanese policy development. It is not important in my country. In the Netherlands, the government, whichever color it is, just says, what happens in the bedroom is none of our business. We're not getting involved. You'll see the same reflex in the United Kingdom. In France and in Scandinavian countries, they're much more concerned. They may not always say this out loud, but for example, we did a family work and fertility trend review of Norway. Norway is a very rich country, and they are concerned about the decline in fertility rates, despite them spending a lot of money on work-life balance supports. So the Korean challenge is also visible in other countries. Maybe not to the same extent, but it is important for policy objectives elsewhere too. That brings me to the chart on public spending. This chart has the dark blue bar at the bottom part of the bar is cash, financial support, child allowances, paid leaves. The gray part is spending on childcare or early childhood education and care. And the light blue part, which is there in some countries, is support for families through the tax system. Now you can see the average, it's about 2.5% of GDP in the OECD. You can see on the left-hand side countries where this is higher, France, Nordic countries, which have 3 or 3.5% of GDP spent to these programs. And in the Nordic countries, the large part of family spending by public budget is towards childcare, just to support the work-life balance reconciliation. In other countries, there's a greater focus on fiscal support. France is an example, but it also is important in Germany. Korea is more to the right. We will soon have an update of the database. We're waiting actually for Korean data, which should come in any moment now. And we have an OECD social policy ministerial in February, where we will release all these new numbers. I suspect that the latest Korean numbers will be a little higher than what is here, but the story is that spending on families is still below the average in the OECD, so there should still be some fiscal space to expand financial support for families. In terms of will that help raising the fertility rate? It will, but you have to keep it up. It is important that you generate the trust among Koreans that support will not just be there today, but also in 10 years' time. And the experience in other countries, for example, with the Australian baby bonus, is that if you don't keep it up, then the effect that it might have on the fertility rate will be temporary. Dr. Yamasaki has also said this, but it is just so very true. The government cannot do it alone. It has to bring in employers, unions, labor market institutions. It has to bring in those who are responsible for housing, property developers, plans to build housing for young people who may not necessarily have the funds to buy the most expensive apartments in town. So you have to bring in a whole range of stakeholders to address this issue. The fertility rate decline is not just caused by one thing, it is caused by a range of reasons. So you also need to, your policy needs to address a range of factors to make it effective. What is clear is that it is very important that you support the reconciliation of work and family life. As we've seen, the number of people below 30 who have children has declined rapidly. It therefore becomes even more important to support those who are over 30, who have established themselves in the labor market, who have somehow managed to get housing, to give them the support they need to continue to combine their work and family responsibilities. And as we've seen, Korea is a rapidly aging society. It needs a greater participation of underrepresented groups in the labor market. You need to make a more efficient use of this enormous human capital pool available among women, which is not used in the same way as it is for men. And you can do so much better. The same applies for younger workers. They are underrepresented in the labor market. You can increase the participation of that group. The issue of non-regular and regular workers has been brought up. It's very important to extend benefits, access to leave to non-regular workers. I know that Korea has very high incidence of small, medium enterprises, and that these may face relatively great difficulty replacing workers who, for example, go on maternity leave. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of Korean workers then say, "Oh, then I can't take leave because that's bad for my colleagues." But there should be a system of replacement workers so that people can take the leave to which they are entitled without any of such qualms. It will be good for their health, it will be good for their child's health. So we should encourage that system is used to the full. Yeah, the direct cost of children. I've said this, Korea is unique in its reliance on Hakwon for the education of its children. A similar system exists in Japan and in urban China. The Juku perform a similar role, but their role is not as pervasive as it is in Korea. So anything you can do to reduce the competitive nature of the education system and increase its creativity, its play-based learning, you should seriously consider undertaking reforms in that direction. And strengthen vocational training, for example, is another practical way of reducing the reliance on university entrance exams. And then finally, prepare for a lower fertility future. As I said, there are groups which are underrepresented in the labor market, women, younger workers. You can make more use of a migration, a consistent and coherent migration policy, and use modern technology to increase your productivity, to address the challenges that come with a declining working age population. Thank you very much for listening to me. Was it Gamda Hamdina? I didn't get that right, but...